اللهم كل ولي الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرزك توعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. So we were discussing the concept of concealed shirk, and that when we do something, any action, be it ibadat or other than ibadat, we do it for Allah's sake. And in the Quran, chapter 12, verse 106, most believers are mushrik, and this is the concealed form of shirk. And when one analyzes one's daily activities, here, if one is honest to oneself, they see that they are drowned in this concealed shirk. Because the actions that one does, for example, reading Quran, dua, giving charity, doing salatul layl, fasting, even the non-ibadat, like driving to work, studying, and inviting people, or publishing something, or all these different actions, be they ibadat or not, one sees that Allah is used as a means to something else. They're not done for Allah's sake, period. And whenever Allah is used as a means to something else, let's call it X, that X becomes, it's called in the language of the Quran, an idol. Because in the Quran, whenever you see shirk in the Quran, it's more than this idea of open shirk, that you say this entity is God. That's haram according to the Sharia. But shirk has the concealed form too. And therefore idol worshipping, there's the open form and the concealed form. in the concealed form of shirk, the idol would be that which you want to attain to, and in the process you're using Allah as a means to. So, if I gave charity so that a family member recovers, that family member is an idol for you. Yes. Although it's not haram, don't get me wrong, but you're an idol worshipper in the concealed form. This is concealed shirk. If you do Salatul Layl so that your sustenance increases, that increased sustenance becomes an idol. It's your idol, yes. Yes. Sometimes when a child wants to go to school, you give the child, for example, a present so that he starts the school process. You want him to go to school, and so you give him a present, sweets, chocolates, to get him motivated. And the child goes to primary school, secondary school. The idea of giving presents to go to secondary school now becomes a bit less real. And they understand the importance of knowledge. Then they go to university, it even becomes, more real. And the idea of giving a present to someone to go to university becomes less plausible now. Then, for example, they become a cancer specialist. Okay? You don't give them a present or money or anything and say that, I'll give you this so you could go to work today and research cancer. They're researching it because for the sake of cancer, for the sake of, finding a cure for cancer. They're not doing it to get money anymore. They understand the importance of knowledge. So you see how a child, it starts with presents. But at the end they understand they do it for knowledge. Although some people may, even at the end, they do it for money. It's possible, but that's not usually the case. But in religious affairs, the same holds. The beginning, the Imams, Ahlul Bayt, it's a pedagogical tool. They said, you do salat, you get increased sustenance, you get this benefit, you get that benefit, you'll get heaven, and all these things, to get us onto the path. But let's say after 5 years of spiritual wayfaring, this should be now, you should have digested or tasted something of spiritual wayfaring. And it's no longer for the rewards, you're doing it for Allah's sake. And then 10 years, 20 years, but if after 50, 60, all your life, it's still like day one, that you do this particular ritual for this reward, that's using Allah as a means. And look how much idol worshipping was done all one's life, even though it's not haram, because it's not the open form of shirk, but look how much contamination. And this contamination, when it reaches a certain threshold, it'll facilitate you to err and sin in relation to the Sharia. It'll make you fall short in the Sharia, and then you start doing sins. So someone like Shimr, who was a defender of Walaya with Amir al-Mu'mineen in the Battle of Siffin, but he was contaminating himself because it wasn't for Allah's sake. He went to the battle, he did jihad, but he wanted the prestige, the other things, and they were idols because Allah was used as a means again. He was doing jihad, but to get prestige. Sometimes Allah is used for these unethical things, like you're using Allah, but you want these worldly things. And sometimes you're using Allah as a means to hereafter things. So the example of the first would be using Allah to get more money, to get more power, more honor. And these people will fall eventually, sooner or later. Sometimes you use Allah for hereafter blessings, and that's good to start off with, at least for heaven, for the rewards, sustenance and other things. But the aim is we wahdahu la sharika la. We say this every day. Only Allah. We're not associating anyone with Allah. And in the concealed shirk, we keep on associating with Allah because we're using Allah as a means to something else. But we're saying La Sharika La. But if we're honest to ourselves during the day, we're drowned in this shirk. But yes, don't worry about getting heaven. You'll have that heavenly stable. Many people will go to heaven. Children, for example, those who have passed away in different manners, those who have certain handicaps, and it's not a very difficult thing, yes. So at the same time that I'm trying to emphasize the importance of being contaminated with concealed shirk, at the same time the hope that inshallah we'll have some heaven that shouldn't be lost. So this has to be cleansed. All these different traces of concealed shirk which we're incorporating on a daily basis, we have to start cleansing ourselves from this and start doing things for Allah's sake alone. And here there are different protocols. I had a very good ustad once, and he was a student of one of Allama Tabataba'i's very close students. I don't think I've ever mentioned the name, it's not necessary, but he passed away. He was only, I think 50 something when he passed away. And his ustad was Allama Tabataba'i's very close student. His ustad was Sheikh Pahlawani, the ustad of my ustad. Yeah. And Sheikh Pahlawani I saw 3 times. I managed to see him. He was a very humble man, and he lived in a very humble residence. When I went to his house, we were sitting on, earth, ground. There was no carpet or anything. Yes. And the problem was that with this ustad of mine and other students of this particular Oy Pahlawani, it was incredible that they were at each other's throats. And it was very sad to see, students of one mentor kind of attacking one another. And I had to leave that kind of environment. It was very unhealthy. But anyway, he passed away very recently. And he gave this protocol, and he attributed it to Sheikh Pahlawani, and who attributed it to Allama Tabatabai. Yes. And the protocol is this, that we want to start cleansing ourselves from concealed shirk. And to do that, it's cleansing ourselves from the idea of using Allah as a means to something else. I mean, sometimes when you sin, when you actually go against the Sharia, it makes no sense that you're doing it for Allah's sake, because it's a plain contradiction in terms. You can't sin and then say, you can't even use Allah. Well, you can, but you're abusing it. You're using Allah as a means of sinning. But even when you don't sin, and that's what we were dealing with primarily, even when you don't sin, you're using Allah as a means to something else. We want to cleanse ourselves from all this and do things for Allah's sake. So step one is becoming accustomed to and making taqwa second nature within us. And that requires practice. So for example, for 6 months, you truly try to not sin intentionally. So that requires you to know what your wajibat are. It requires you to know what your sins are. What are sins? Here your ustad is your marja, your religious authority, whoever you see that as. They are your ustad, and they have the treatise, and you follow their prescriptions, their instructions. They tell you what is wajib and what is a sin. The thing is that sometimes you may sin forgetfully. You may, for example, inadvertently sin. That happens with everyone. But you have to try here not to sin intentionally. This has to become second nature. You know, so for a number of months, you really don't sin. Or for example, in your dreams, this is a good sign, he would say, that in your dreams, even in your dreams you don't sin. That's a sign that not sinning has become second nature in you. And so this is step one. This has to be mastered. Although when you do these dhahiri actions of the Sharia, doing the wajibat and refraining from the sins, here we believe that with every zahir, with every exoteric, outwardly aspect of an action or ritual, there is a batin also. You can't separate the zahir and the batin. How much you're benefiting from that batin, even if you don't know there's a batin, how much you're benefiting from it, that's another issue. That's a function of how much khulus you have, how much sincerity you have, how much you're doing it for Allah's sake alone. So even if someone doesn't know about the batin, but they stick to the wajibat and they do refrain from the sins, okay, and they never knew, out of ignorance, not that they were against it, they're not against it, but they never knew about the batin. But they will benefit a lot, even in the batini sense. Let's imagine they were illiterate, they were everything, but they stuck to this taqwa, doing the wajibat, refraining from the muharramat. They will still benefit on the condition that it was done out of khulus, for Allah's sake alone, not conceal shirk. Sometimes you're taught the batini meanings, that's okay too. It may be an incentive, but it's not enough. The khulus has to be there if you want to reap the batini benefits of that given action. So this is step one. If you fail in this step, or are failing, you can't really progress. Why? Because we want to cleanse traces of concealed shirk. How can you even start doing that? I.e., how can you start doing things for Allah's sake more and more, wholeheartedly, when you're still sinning? See, it's a contradiction here. So this taqwa has to be made second nature. This not sinning, even if it's not done out of khulus for now, you do the wajibat and you refrain from the sins. So that entails you knowing what the wajibat are and acting upon it. Knowing what the sins are and refraining from it. That's step one. Without this, you can't enter step two. If you do, you're trespassing. You're trespassing on usurped land. And that has its own complications. Do you know, for example, if you go to your neighbor's house and pray, well, it's not your land. You didn't have the permission to pray, for example. You have to get permission, consent. Otherwise, you're trespassing, even going on that land without the owner's permission. And here too. Here in step two, after succeeding in step one, step two is, and this is, this whole process is called muraqabah. This a kind of self-scrutiny of one's actions, refining one's actions, tuning one's actions in a particular format. In the first step of muraqabah, it was tuning one's actions, i.e. with every input of action that you want to do, it goes through a modulating or a filtering mechanism, that action. In step one, the filtering mechanism is this wajib or is it haram? If it's haram, I'm not going to do it. If it's wajib, I'm going to do it. If you want, you can then progress to the mustahabbat and the makruhat, but let's first master the wajibat and refrain from the muharramat. So with every action you say, is this wajib or not? Or is this a sin or not? In step two, the filtering mechanism is, am I doing it for Allah's sake alone? I.e., am I doing it to please Allah only? That's important. With every action you do, am I doing it to please Allah? So, before giving a speech, before doing any action, the actor has to say to oneself, am I doing this to please Allah? That has to be, one's intentions have to be tuned in this channel. I want to do this to please Allah alone. This is very difficult. In the Holy Quran, chapter 39, verse 45, وَإِذَا ذُكِرَ اللَّهُ وَحْدَهُ, when Allah is mentioned, but when Allah alone is mentioned, اشمأزت قلوب الذين لا يؤمنون بالغيب لا يؤمنون بالآخرة. That when Allah's name is mentioned alone, the hearts of those who don't believe in the Akhirah, they shrink with aversion. They don't like it. They're kind of uncomfortable with it. They kind of move away from it when Allah's name is mentioned alone. And these are Muslims, mu'min, they're believers. But it says, who shrinks? The hearts. When it's speaking of the hearts, it's a high level here. But the hearts of those who don't believe in Akhirah, they haven't tasted Akhirah. What was Akhirah? Akhirah was the batin of the worldly life. So they will shrink with aversion. They haven't tasted. They believe in level 1 of Akhirah, that there is an Akhirah, but they haven't gone beyond that. And when you tell such people to do things for Allah's sake alone, wahda ishma'azzat, their hearts will shrink with distaste, with aversion, and they want to go away from it. وَإِذَا ذُكِرَ الَّذِينَ مِن دُونِهِ, the verse continues, but if other than Allah is mentioned, إِذَا هُمْ يَسْتَبْشِرُونَ, then they start rejoicing, then they become comfortable. You tell them, for example,